Let's step into, all right, this is our fun topic, your favorite topic, I think, the Coconut Joe. These are stories from the trenches of interesting things realtors do, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if Clint Eastwood was here, and the inspiring or the oops chronicles or behind the blunders.
Yep.
Sorry.
So this is an interesting one, I'd say, because the NAR lawsuit came out. It's been probably a little more than a month that this whole commission component has come out and been, now we have to execute. And I've been actually quite shocked at what's gone on in the industry and how, the idea was to decouple the commissions. In other words, listing agent determines listing agent's compensation with their seller, and buyer's agent determines buyer's agent compensation with their buyer, and you separate them. That was the whole Department of Justice component. And
brilliant, by the way. I'm joking. Sorry.
I actually,
I know you have some agreement with that.
I love that component, right? The idea that somebody else is determining my fee, that you and I are going to talk about the services you need that I'm going to do for you, but yet somebody else is telling me how much I get paid for that. That's a stupid concept, right? So I do like it in that sense. You and I talk about our services, and you and I talk about the fee for that service. The question is how does it get paid? And we went from one way of getting paid to four potential options now, right? Either seller pays us directly, we write it into the contract, which is the most common way, which is the most logical way to do it. And until the mortgage industry shifts, that's going to be the predominant way of doing it. The second is seller to credit buyer for the amount, and then the buyer pays it through closing to us, which is still basically the seller paying it, right? And then buyer paying it directly, they bring it in as a closing cost or some combination of the two. The reality is the vehicle, how do we structure that to get paid? It's the purchase contract, and it's the proceeds of the sale that we determine, how it gets paid. And the funny thing is I've seen every different reaction from agents, and most don't know how to pivot. They're still trying to work the same old way that it was, and they're having difficulty pivoting.
Yeah. So what I was gonna again sum up the situation is that even though what was the date? August 18th, was it? That
something like
actually
that.
Yeah, somewhere around the mid-August where it switched over, and that means that every buyer has to sign a buyer's broker agreement with a buyer's agent, and then the commissions are negotiated, as Scott said, in several different ways. But to sum it up, people are not catching on too quickly. Agents, I'm talking about, right? And we expected that. I mean, it's like, how are people? This is like, it really confuses. It doesn't necessarily have to be confusing, but it really confuses what was a very simple way we did it before. So let's get into your story that you have for this.
So I actually have two on this. So first of all, I see emails going. So you cannot list if seller is willing to offer compensation, which is just a messed up concept to me to begin with. Offer compensation, you can't put it in the MLS, but you can advertise it in other places. So now what every person is doing is they're going to the title and escrow companies or their own company for these e-blasts. And it's not everybody. There's a lot of agents that have gotten it and understand it, but there's a lot that don't. They go to their title and escrow company to send the e-blast out to all agents. So I get these emails, and in the subject line it says, seller willing to compensate X amount, seller willing to pay X amount, seller willing to compensate 1%, seller willing to compensate 2%. And I'm like, I don't understand that concept, because if whatever you and I have agreed to, I'm your buyer's agent, you're the buyer, we have an agreement. You're giving away money on the listing side when you start announcing that. If I'm willing to work with you for $500 and the listing agent is announcing 2.5%, I know there's flexibility and negotiation on that at that point, and I'm going to negotiate it. So you've just cost your seller money. You've left money on the table. The other concept is, okay, you're only offering 1%. We're on a 3% agreement and you want it built into the contract. You don't want to bring it as a closing cost. Who's the seller to argue with that? Who's the seller to fight on that? And the reason I say that is you focus on the commission, you lose on the net. And where this came out, 2 instances. One, I submitted and I called the agent, and a lot of this is communication. I said, we're on a, let's just call it 3% buyer agreement. Oh, well, seller's only offering 2.5%. Okay, I don't really care. This is our agreement, right? And the point being was, if you're listed at $500,000 and you're only offering 2.5%, and I brought you $1 million offer, but you're going to pay me 3%, I'm asking, you're telling me you're not going to pay that additional 0.5% for $1 million offer. And the answer is yes, you're going to, right?
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
Well, it all comes down to the money. I mean, what the seller's going to look at it and say, you know, what is my net? You know,
net.
And that's what it comes down to, and that's the logical part. But it's just getting to the net it doesn't have to be complicated, but it's been complicated, and I believe it will be until people catch on a little bit more, you know, in terms of, you know, how they're negotiating. And it really, to me now, the negotiation, it's not just about how much you're paying for that property. I mean, in the end, that's what the bottom line is. A buyer's going to pay X amount of money and a seller's going to accept X amount of money. And when you meet, then you've got a deal. And within that, the seller's agent and the buyer's agent, hopefully being satisfied with the compensation that they are receiving, you know, in the deal. That's the goal. And it's the goal is so
at the end of the day, what I see happening, and I think this is going to be a 1 to 2 year frustration period, and it's going to, and where does it land? It lands on the consumer, because we as realtors got to work through that system. And the reality is if you get solely focus on the compensation portion, you're going to take your eyeball off the net and you're going to lose. And my second story to that is we had an agent who had an agreement with their client for a certain amount of money, and the seller says, they said, this, we're going to write it into the contract, this is our fee. Okay, they presented it and they countered back with a lower compensation pay, and the buyer got irritated and got offended and said, I'm not buying the home, and moved on. And so I go back to, if you focus on the commission and you're going to take your eyeball off the net, and if you start negotiating multiple things, you complicate the negotiation process when you have price, and now you've added in, oh, well, we're going to negotiate this compensation thing. And the reality is the buyer and the buyer's agent determine their fee and their services, and it's really not the seller's business. And the listing agents need to be good in the beginning of explaining how this process is going to work and focusing the seller on the net. And if they don't, then we're going to have problems, and the seller is actually probably going to not net as much money. And so what the moral of all this is, there's a lot of, we're going to go through disruption for a while people try to figure this out. And the frustration is going to fall back on the consumer. And it means it's ultra important who you hire to work with, someone that's seasoned and knowledgeable that can help walk through scenarios, so you have a smooth process and you don't make costly mistakes.
A very good synopsis of the situation.